The man who promised to spend forever with me destroyed our future in front of both our families with just one sentence. 4 years. That was how long Thomas and I had been together. We had survived long work hours, financial struggles, and every challenge life placed in our path. We had chosen a wedding date, toured small venues, and dreamed about the home we would one day build together. I truly believed I knew the man I loved. That belief ended during one family dinner. Thomas had invited my relatives to meet his family for the first time. His parents owned several successful businesses, while my family lived simple, honest lives. My father was a retired schoolteacher. My mother made dresses from home. We never pretended to be wealthy, but we were proud of who we were. At first, the evening felt warm. People laughed. Stories were shared. Even Thomas smiled as he introduced everyone. Then his uncle jokingly asked, "Thomas, what made you choose Grace?" The room became quiet. Thomas leaned back in his chair with a careless grin. "I guess I liked helping people." A few people laughed. I forced a smile. Then he looked directly at me. "Let's be honest. Grace comes from nothing. She has nothing to offer. Without me, she'd still be living the same ordinary life." He shrugged as though he had simply stated a fact. "I love her, but if we're talking about value..." He paused. "She's honestly worthless." Silence filled the room. My mother's face turned pale. My father's hands slowly tightened around his glass. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Not one word came out of my mouth. Not because I didn't have anything to say. Because the man I trusted had just shown me exactly how little he respected me. I slowly reached for my engagement ring. Thomas frowned. "Grace." I slipped the ring from my finger and gently placed it on the table between us. "I've spent 4 years loving the man I thought you were," I said quietly. "But I can't spend another day with the man you've chosen to become." No shouting. No tears. Just peace. I picked up my handbag and walked toward the door. Behind me, nobody tried to stop me. As I reached the front porch, the tears finally came. Every dream I had carried into that house stayed behind with the ring resting on the dinner table. But before I reached my car, I glanced back through the dining room window. Everyone was staring at Thomas. Everyone except one person. His mother. She wasn't looking at me with satisfaction. She was looking at her son. And for the first time that night, I saw guilt written across her face. Walking away from Thomas was the hardest thing I had ever done. The first few weeks felt unbearable. I deleted wedding photos, packed away the dress I would never wear, ignored the endless whispers from people who believed his version of the story. To them, I was simply the woman who couldn't fit into a wealthy family. They never knew what really happened inside that dining room. But life doesn't stop because your heart is broken. Every morning, I put on my pale blue scrubs, tied back my hair, and walked into the children's hospital where I worked as a pediatric nurse. The children didn't care whether I had been humiliated. They didn't ask about broken engagements. They only cared that someone smiled when they were scared. And that became enough. Helping them slowly helped me heal. Several months passed before I noticed a familiar last name on a patient's file. Ashford. I looked again. It wasn't Thomas. It was his father, Mr. William Ashford. He had been quietly receiving treatment at our hospital every Thursday morning. The illness wasn't public. Even many members of his own family didn't know how serious it had become. When I first walked into his room, he didn't recognize me. I wore a face mask during most procedures, and we had only met briefly once before the engagement dinner. To him, I was simply another nurse. "Good morning," I said warmly. "How are you feeling today?" He smiled weakly. "I've had better mornings." From that day on, I cared for him every week. I adjusted his medication, checked his vital signs, made sure he never felt alone during long treatments. I never mentioned Thomas. I never mentioned the broken engagement. I never wanted gratitude. Kindness shouldn't depend on personal history. Week after week, he began looking forward to our conversations. "You always know how to make difficult days easier," he told me one afternoon. His words stayed with me, because they reminded me that my worth had never been decided by Thomas's opinion. It had always been found in the lives I touched every single day. Outside the hospital walls, Thomas continued living the life he had chosen. He had no idea his own father was being cared for by the woman he had once called worthless. Some secrets don't stay hidden forever. And sometimes, life chooses the moment they are revealed. The following Thursday started like every other treatment day. William smiled as I helped him settle into his chair. We exchanged a few quiet jokes. Everything seemed normal. Then, without warning, the color drained from his face. His breathing became shallow. The heart monitor screamed. And before anyone could reach him, William Ashford collapsed onto the hospital floor. The emergency team moved fast. Doctors surrounded William Ashford as alarms echoed through the treatment room. Nurses rushed to stabilize him while I stayed focused on every instruction being called across the room. After several tense minutes, his condition became stable enough for further tests. Then the lead physician delivered news none of us wanted to hear. William had lost far more blood than anyone expected. He needed a rare blood type immediately. Without it, the next few hours would be critical. The hospital checked its emergency supply. There wasn't enough. Staff members began searching the donor registry. Time was running out. I stood quietly, listening as the physician read through the list. Then he looked up at me. Grace. I already knew what he was about to say. My blood type matched perfectly. There wasn't even a second of doubt in my mind. I'll do it, I said. Another nurse looked surprised. You've been on your feet all day. I'll be fine. The paperwork was completed within minutes. As I lay in the donation chair, I stared at the ceiling. Part of me remembered everything Thomas had said. Worthless. Nothing to offer. Those words had followed me for weeks. But in that moment, they carried no weight. Because kindness doesn't ask whether someone deserves it. It simply chooses to act. I wasn't donating blood for Thomas. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was helping a man who needed another chance to live. That was enough. The donation finished successfully. The medical team immediately began preparing William for the transfusion. Before leaving the room, I quietly stopped one of the nurses. I don't want anyone to know it was me. She looked confused. They'll ask. Tell them the donor wishes to remain anonymous. She nodded. I understand. Hours later, William's condition slowly improved. The color returned to his face. His heartbeat became steady. The crisis had passed. Word spread quickly through the Ashford family. Thomas arrived at the hospital with his mother and younger sister, desperate for answers. The doctor met them in the hallway. Your father is stable. Relief washed across every face. Thomas's mother wiped away tears. Who saved him? The doctor smiled gently. A donor came forward immediately. Thomas looked around. Who was it? I'm sorry. The donor requested complete privacy. Thomas's mother lowered her head. Whoever that person is, I'll spend the rest of my life thanking them. Standing just beyond the corner of the hallway, hidden behind the partially closed nurse's station door, I quietly listened before returning to work. I thought the secret would stay buried forever. But some acts of kindness have a way of finding the light. And by the following morning, the Ashford family would discover exactly who their anonymous hero had been. By the next morning, the secret I never wanted revealed was no longer a secret. Hospitals keep careful records. A routine administrative check confirmed what the doctor already suspected. I had been the anonymous donor. The news reached William Ashford's family before my morning shift even began. Thomas's mother stood frozen outside her husband's hospital room, unable to speak. It was Grace, she whispered. The doctor nodded. She stepped forward immediately. She also asked us not to tell anyone. His mother slowly covered her mouth. After everything my son said to her, the doctor answered quietly. She never mentioned any of it. Inside the room, William had also learned the truth. His eyes remained fixed on the ceiling for a long moment before he spoke. She saved me. There was disbelief in his voice. Not because Grace had helped him, but because she had every reason not to. Thomas arrived a few minutes later carrying fresh clothes for his father. His mother met him in the hallway. We know who donated. Thomas looked relieved. Good. Who was it? She stared directly into his eyes. It was Grace. Thomas laughed. No. His mother didn't respond. That's impossible. The hospital confirmed it. Thomas shook his head. She's doing this because she wants everyone to feel sorry for her. She wants attention. His mother's expression changed instantly. For the first time in years, disappointment replaced pride. Thomas, that woman owed this family absolutely nothing. You humiliated her. You broke her heart. And she still chose to save your father's life. He folded his arms stubbornly. There has to be another reason. He couldn't accept the truth. Because accepting it meant admitting that the woman he dismissed had shown more strength, compassion, and dignity than he had. Later that afternoon, I quietly entered William's room for another routine check. He watched me carefully. There was something different in his eyes now. Not pity, respect. I finished checking his medication without mentioning the donation. As I turned toward the door, he spoke softly. Grace. I stopped. Thank you. I smiled politely. You don't need to thank me. I'm your nurse. No. He slowly shook his head. I'm thanking the woman who saved my life. I lowered my eyes for a moment. Then I quietly left the room. Outside, William looked toward the door long after it closed. Finally, he reached for the bedside phone. Please ask Nurse Grace to return later. The nurse smiled. Of course. William leaned back against his pillow. There are things I need to tell her. And for the first time since that heartbreaking dinner, someone in the Ashford family wanted to hear Grace's story before judging her. William Ashford had been recovering in the hospital for several days. His condition had improved, but his mind kept returning to one person. Grace. Every morning she greeted him with the same calm smile. She checked his medication, adjusted his IV, made sure he was comfortable. She treated him with kindness that never felt forced. Not once did she mention Thomas. Not once did she remind him of what had happened. One quiet afternoon, after Grace finished checking his chart, William spoke. Would you stay for a few minutes? Grace smiled politely. My next patient isn't due for another 10 minutes. She pulled a chair beside his bed. William looked at her thoughtfully. My son dated you for 4 years. She nodded. But I don't think he ever truly knew you. Grace looked down at the floor. There isn't much to know. William smiled gently. I think there's more than you realize. For a long moment, the room remained silent. Then Grace quietly began. My parents have always worked harder than anyone I've ever known. My father spent years driving delivery trucks. My mother cleaned offices after finishing her daytime job. They gave everything they had to raise us. Her voice remained steady. But money was never easy. When I became a nurse, I made a promise. I would help carry the weight they had carried for so many years. William listened without saying a word. Grace continued. I helped pay the household bills. I contributed to my younger brother's university education. I helped my younger sister complete nursing school. If my parents needed something, I simply found a way. She smiled softly. There were professional courses I postponed. Vacations I never took. Personal dreams I delayed. But I never felt like I was losing anything. My family had sacrificed for me first. It was my turn to sacrifice for them. William felt his eyes grow heavy with emotion. And through all of that, you still supported Thomas. Grace nodded. I believed in his future. If he needed encouragement, I gave it. If he doubted himself, I reminded him what he was capable of. I never expected anything in return. William slowly closed his eyes. The woman Thomas had called worthless had quietly spent years lifting everyone around her higher than herself. He finally understood what his son had failed to see. Grace's greatest wealth had never been money. It had always been her character. As Grace stood to continue her rounds, William gently stopped her. I owe you more than my life. Grace smiled warmly. No. You owe me nothing. I'm simply doing what I believe is right. She quietly left the room. William watched the door close behind her. A deep sadness settled over him. His son had searched for perfection, without ever recognizing the extraordinary woman who had been standing beside him all along.
The hardest punishment isn't losing the person you love. It's realizing you were the reason they walked away. Thomas couldn't escape the truth anymore. No matter where he turned, Grace's kindness stood in sharp contrast to his own actions. The woman he had publicly humiliated had quietly saved his father's life. She had asked for no praise. No apology. Not even recognition. That truth changed everything inside the Ashford family. One evening, after William returned home from the hospital, he asked Thomas to join him in the study. His mother was already there. The room was silent. William looked directly at his son. "I need to ask you something." Thomas nodded. "When Grace was part of this family, did you ever truly know her?" Thomas hesitated. "I thought I did." His father slowly shook his head. "No. You knew what she never complained about. You never cared enough to discover what she carried." His mother's voice was calm but firm. "We welcomed your success. But somewhere along the way, you confused success with superiority." Thomas looked down. "I made a mistake." William answered immediately. "No. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. You chose to humiliate the woman who loved you." Those words landed harder than Thomas expected. For the first time in his life, neither of his parents defended him. Dinner conversations became shorter. Phone calls became rare. The distance inside the family grew wider each week. Meanwhile, Grace continued living exactly as she always had. She cared for her patients, helped her younger brother prepare for university, encouraged her sister to keep chasing her dreams. Whenever coworkers mentioned Thomas or asked about the broken engagement, Grace simply smiled. "I hope he's doing well." She never insulted him, never shared the painful details. She refused to let bitterness become part of her future. Thomas, however, couldn't move on so easily. Every memory seemed different now. Every conversation replayed inside his mind. One rainy Saturday, he visited the apartment they had once planned to renovate together. Most of Grace's belongings had already been removed. Only a few forgotten boxes remained in a storage closet. As he sorted through them, one small leather notebook slipped onto the floor. Then another. Then another. Each one had Grace's handwriting on the cover. Personal journals. His hands trembled as he picked up the first notebook. Inside the front page, a single sentence was carefully written. "I hope one day Thomas sees himself the way I see him, because I believe he's capable of becoming an incredible man." Thomas closed his eyes. His chest tightened. He hadn't just lost a relationship. He had lost someone who believed in him even when he didn't deserve it. And as the rain continued falling outside, he slowly opened the next journal, knowing every page was about to reveal a love he had been too blind to appreciate. Thomas sat alone as the rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. Grace's journals rested on the table in front of him. He opened the second notebook. Every page carried neat handwriting. Every sentence felt painfully honest. There were no angry words. No bitterness. Only quiet hope. One entry caught his attention immediately. "Thomas has another important presentation tomorrow. He's been working so hard. I know he's worried, so I secretly paid for his favorite suit to be repaired. I'll never tell him. I just want him to walk into that meeting feeling confident." Thomas frowned. He remembered that suit. He had thanked a coworker, believing someone at the office had arranged it. Another page. "I cancelled my weekend nursing seminar because Thomas needed help preparing his proposal. My career can wait. Right now, he needs someone who believes in him." Thomas lowered the journal. He had never known. He kept reading. "Sometimes I wonder if he'll ever realize that success feels better when you have someone to share it with. I don't need expensive gifts. I just hope he always treats people kindly." His chest tightened. Every sacrifice Grace had made had been invisible. Not because she wanted recognition. Because love, to her, wasn't about keeping score. It was about giving without expecting anything back. Thomas leaned back in silence. He thought about every moment he had measured Grace by money, by family background, by status. Meanwhile, she had been quietly building him up while putting her own dreams on hold. She had never asked him to become rich. She had only wanted one thing: respect. The realization hit him harder than any argument ever could. Hours passed before he reached the final journal. As he carefully closed it, something slipped from between the pages. A small velvet box. His hands froze. Slowly, he opened it. Inside rested the engagement ring. Perfectly polished. Untouched. Grace hadn't sold it. She hadn't thrown it away. She had simply kept it. Beneath the ring lay a folded note. Thomas unfolded it with trembling hands. This ring was never about its value. It represented the future we dreamed about together. I'll keep it until my heart no longer hurts enough to remember what could have been. A tear rolled down his face. For the first time, Thomas understood the difference between being loved and truly being valued. He had thrown away both. Now the only question left was whether some mistakes could ever be repaired, or whether he had already lost the greatest gift life had ever placed in his hands. The morning after reading Grace's journals, Thomas made a decision. He couldn't stay silent any longer. He picked up his phone and called her. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He sent a message. Grace, I know I don't deserve your time, but please let me explain. Hours passed without a reply. The next day, he sent another. Then another. Every message became more honest than the last. I was wrong. I judged you without understanding you. I'm sorry for every word I said. Finally, his phone vibrated. For a brief moment, hope rushed back into his heart. It was Grace. Her message was short. Thomas, I truly hope you find peace. But I also need peace. Please respect my decision and let me move forward. There was no anger, no insults, no bitterness, just quiet finality. Thomas stared at the screen for several minutes before placing the phone down. For the first time, he understood something painful. Forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. Grace could forgive him, and still choose a future without him. Later that evening, William found Thomas sitting alone in the garden. You've been trying to reach her. Thomas nodded. I thought if I explained everything. His father gently interrupted. She already understands. That's not the problem. Thomas looked up. Then what is? William sighed. Some wounds don't heal because you say sorry. They heal only if the other person is willing. And sometimes, they've already learned how to live without you. The words settled heavily between them. Thomas had spent years believing every problem could be solved with enough effort. But this wasn't a business deal. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a broken heart. And broken hearts don't follow deadlines. Over the following weeks, Thomas stopped sending messages. Not because he had stopped caring. Because he had finally begun respecting the boundary Grace had asked for. Meanwhile, Grace poured herself into her work. She smiled with her patients, encouraged young nurses, spent evenings laughing with her brother and sister. Little by little, her life became lighter. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because she refused to let it define her future. One quiet afternoon, Thomas received an unexpected phone call from his mother. Her voice sounded different. Tired. Thomas, you need to come home. His heart immediately sank. What happened? There was a long silence. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. Your father collapsed again, and this time, the problem wasn't only his health. It was something far more devastating that would shake the entire Ashford family. Thomas reached the hospital less than 30 minutes after his mother's phone call. Doctors and nurses moved quickly through the emergency department. William Ashford had suffered another serious medical crisis. The family waited anxiously outside the treatment room. Thomas's heart pounded as every second felt like an hour. Then the doors opened. A familiar voice calmly gave instructions to the medical team. Let's stabilize his blood pressure. Monitor his oxygen levels. Prepare the next medication. Thomas looked up. Grace. She was completely focused on her patient. There was no hesitation in her movements. No sign of resentment. No trace of the pain he had caused. To her, William wasn't the father of the man who had humiliated her. He was simply someone who needed help. And that was enough. For hours, Grace remained by William's side. She adjusted his medication, comforted his frightened wife, explained every update with patience and kindness. Not once did she mention the past. Not once did she make anyone feel guilty. Thomas watched everything from the hallway. Each quiet act of compassion felt heavier than any punishment life could have given him. He finally understood something that no journal could fully explain. Grace wasn't pretending to be kind. Kindness was simply who she was. Later that evening, William slowly opened his eyes. His wife reached for his hand. You scared us. William smiled weakly. I guess I'm not finished yet. He noticed Grace checking his chart nearby. Thank you, again. Grace smiled warmly. You don't owe me thanks. I'm only doing my job. William gently shook his head. No, you're doing far more than your job. Grace quietly excused herself and left the room before anyone could continue the conversation. She wasn't looking for praise. She wasn't waiting for Thomas to apologize. She simply moved on to the next patient who needed her care. Thomas followed her into the corridor but stopped several steps behind. He wanted to call her name. He wanted to tell her everything he had realized. Instead, he remained silent, because for the first time, he understood that real love doesn't demand another chance. Real love respects the peace of the person you once hurt. As Grace disappeared down the brightly lit hallway, greeting patients with the same gentle smile she had always carried, Thomas felt something inside him change forever. He wasn't watching the woman he had lost. He was finally seeing the woman she had always been. And in that quiet moment, he realized the second chance he desperately wanted had never belonged to him in the first place. Thomas stood outside the hospital long after Grace finished her shift. He didn't want to surprise her. He didn't want to pressure her. He only wanted one chance to say what should have been said months ago. As Grace stepped through the hospital doors, she noticed him waiting near the entrance. She stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The evening air felt unusually still. Thomas took a slow breath. I won't keep you long. Grace nodded quietly. I'm listening. His voice trembled. I've spent weeks trying to understand how I became someone capable of hurting the person who loved me most. He looked down before continuing. I confused wealth with value. I confused status with character. I believed success gave me the right to judge people. It didn't. His eyes filled with tears. I wasn't better than you. I was simply too blind to see who you really were. Grace remained silent, not because she was cold, because she wanted him to finish. Thomas wiped his eyes. I've read every journal. I know what you sacrificed. I know how much you believed in me. And I destroyed that. I'm sorry, not because I lost you, but because I became someone you never deserved. The words hung between them. Grace looked at him for several seconds before answering. I believe you're sincere. Thomas slowly looked up. And I forgive you. Hope briefly appeared in his eyes. But Grace gently continued. Forgiveness doesn't always restore broken trust. It simply releases the pain. Thomas lowered his head again. He understood. This wasn't punishment. It was reality. Grace smiled softly. For a long time, I blamed myself. I wondered if I wasn't enough. But eventually I realized, the way someone treats you says more about their heart than your worth. Thomas nodded quietly. I know that now. Grace took one small step back. I truly hope you become the man I always believed you could be. And this time, do it for yourself, not for me. Thomas smiled through his tears. I will. For the first time since their relationship ended, both of them felt lighter. Not because they were getting back together, but because honesty had finally replaced regret. As Grace turned to leave, Thomas gently called her name one last time. She looked back. I wish you happiness. Grace smiled warmly. I think I'm finally ready for it. She paused for just a moment. Actually, I'm about to make the biggest decision of my life. Thomas looked surprised. What decision? Grace's smile grew slightly wider. You'll hear about it soon enough. Then she walked away, leaving Thomas standing under the fading evening sky, wondering what new future awaited the woman he had finally learned to admire. A week after their final conversation, Grace stood inside a small conference room at the hospital. Several senior doctors and healthcare directors sat around the table. One of them smiled as he handed her a folder. We've reviewed your work, your leadership, your compassion, and your commitment to patients. He paused before adding, we'd like you to lead our new children's outreach program. Grace looked down at the documents. The program would send medical teams into rural and underserved communities where thousands of children had little or no access to healthcare. It wasn't a promotion built on money. It was built on purpose. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. I'd be honored. The room erupted in warm applause. Later that afternoon, Grace packed the few personal belongings from her hospital office. Her coworkers hugged her one by one. You'll change so many lives. We're proud of you. Grace smiled. I hope I make a difference. Outside the hospital, a transport vehicle waited to take the outreach team to their first assignment. As Grace loaded her bags, she noticed a familiar face standing across the parking lot. Thomas. He hadn't come to stop her. He hadn't come to ask her to stay. He simply wanted to see her one last time. Their eyes met briefly. Thomas smiled. Not the confident smile he used to wear. This one carried gratitude, respect, acceptance. Grace returned the smile with quiet kindness. No words were needed. She climbed into the vehicle. The engine started. As the outreach team drove away, Thomas remained standing exactly where he was. Watching the woman he once underestimated leave to build a future that was far bigger than either of them had imagined. His father quietly walked beside him. "You still love her?" Thomas nodded. "I always will." William looked toward the disappearing vehicle. "Then honor that love, by becoming someone worthy of the lesson she gave you." Thomas watched until the vehicle disappeared beyond the hospital gates. Only then did he fully understand. Real love isn't something you're automatically entitled to because you regret your mistakes. It's a gift. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is allowing someone to walk toward the life they were meant to live. Grace never chose revenge. She never tried to prove Thomas wrong. She simply chose purpose over pain. And in doing so, she found a future no broken relationship could ever take away. 5 years passed. Grace's name slowly became known across the country. The children's outreach program she had accepted grew far beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a small team serving a handful of rural communities had expanded into a nationwide network providing healthcare, vaccinations, education, and hope to thousands of children and families. New clinics opened. Lives were saved. Young nurses joined the mission because Grace had inspired them to believe that compassion was just as powerful as medicine. She never chased fame, yet recognition found her anyway. One afternoon, Grace stood on a stage accepting a National Humanitarian Award. The audience rose to its feet in applause. She smiled humbly before saying only a few words. "This honor doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every healthcare worker who chooses kindness, even when nobody is watching." The applause grew even louder. Meanwhile, Thomas had also built a successful life. His career recovered. His business flourished. People respected his work. From the outside, it looked as though he had everything. But every time he heard Grace's name on the news, every time he saw another story about the children whose lives she had changed, he remembered the dinner where he had looked at her and said she had nothing to offer. He finally understood how wrong he had been. He hadn't lost Grace because she wasn't enough. He had lost her because he couldn't recognize her worth until it was too late. One evening, Thomas placed the old engagement ring back inside its velvet box. Not with sadness, but with gratitude. It reminded him of the greatest lesson his life had ever taught him. His father once asked him, "Do you still regret losing her?" Thomas smiled gently. "Every day. But regret isn't the lesson. The lesson is becoming someone who never judges another person the way I once judged her." Some stories end with people finding each other again. This one didn't. Because not every broken relationship is meant to be restored. Some people enter your life to change your heart, not your future. Grace found purpose. Thomas found humility. And both walked away stronger than they had ever been before. Because in the end, the greatest mistake you can make is judging someone's value by what they own instead of who they are. Character is the kind of wealth that cannot be bought, stolen, or replaced. And once you truly recognize someone's worth, make sure it isn't already too late.